In this video, we're going to learn to do something really exciting. We're going to be able to start taking input from the user.
This video is brought to you by OppiePies Academy.
Now, once you can take input from the user, we can make programs that are truly interactive, and that makes programming a lot more fun. So let's go ahead and ask the user to input their age. So we can say age equals, and then we'll use input. How old are you? And what I'm putting in here is the prompt. So that's exactly what it's going to say to the user before they type in their age. And then we can print, you are years old. So that variable age is what's holding whatever value the user enters. So just like that, we can return the age that they entered. All right, so let's go ahead and try this little program. I'm going to hit File and Save. And let's call this input.py. And then we'll run it using the command line. New command line window. And here we go. So I'm going to navigate to my Python folder. Oops, let's navigate to the desktop first, and then to the Python folder. And now here we go. We've got our input.py, so Python input.py, and there it goes. It asks, how old are you? So I'm 41. You are 41 years old. So that worked just fine. Now we can take the value that the user enters and use it in an expression as well. So we could say, for example, dog years equals age times 7, and then say print in dog years, you would be years old. And then again, use our friend format here to fill in dog years. So now we're taking a value entered by the user, assigned to the variable age, because remember, the right side of the assignment operator is evaluated first. So that input statement is evaluated. We print out the result. You are so many years old. And then we figure out, again, right side of the assignment operator first. So age, which is the value the user entered, we multiply that by 7 and assign it back to dog years. Let's go ahead and try it. So I saved using Command S this time on my keyboard. And there's our input.py. So we'll run that with Python input.py. I again use tab to autocomplete. How old are you? Let's put in something a little more reasonable. 5. You are 5 years old, but in dog years, you'd be 35. In 41, in dog years, you'd be 287 years old. So we can enter numbers. We could even enter, if we wanted to, floating point numbers. How old are you? I'm about 41 and a half at this point. And notice it respects the floating point number, and the result of the expression is also a floating point number. So in dog years, I'd be 290 and a half years old. That's a pretty old dog. So let me try one more thing. Let's try another input here, and I'm going to say name equals input. What is your name? And then we'll print howdy name. So there's our placeholder, .format name, just like that. All right, so this looks a lot like what we did before. But remember, this time we are actually asking for a string, right? The name is going to be a string. It's not going to be a value. So let's go ahead and save our Python document, and let's run this in the terminal. So here we go. Type clear to clear the terminal screen, and then Python. And of course, this is called input.py. So how old am I? 41. What is your name? Mark. And then we get an error. And this has to do with the version of Python that you're using. So follow this carefully. Depending on your computer and your setup, you might be using a version 3 of Python or a version 4. Here's how you can tell. Notice my shell says Python 2.7.6 shell. So this is version 2.7.6 of Python. If your version begins with 3, what I just did would work fine, because they changed how input works in version 3 of Python on. So you can always use the input command. However, if you're using a 2-point something version for numbers, either floating point numbers or for integers, input works just fine. But as you can see, it doesn't work for non-integers. If you're doing a string, you've got to use something called raw input, just like that. So raw inputs for strings if you're using a 2-point something version of Python. Now we'll try it again, and we're going to get a much better result. So what raw input does is it doesn't try and process the input. It simply deals with it however it's entered. So that works just fine. So what you have to remember is if you're using the older version of Python, which, by the way, I have a fairly new Mac, and this is what came on it, then you're going to have to use raw input for strings and input for integers and floating point numbers. So just keep that in mind if you're using an old 2-point something version. Again, if you're using version 3 point something, you can just use input, and it'll work just fine. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty much identical how it operates. So in this particular section, we learned about the input command and how we could use the value that's inputted to repeat it back to the user or use it as an expression. We also talked about raw input for versions of 2-point something Python, where that's used to get a string value, and just plain old inputs used to get a string value on more current versions of Python. Doesn't matter what you have, just remember that small difference and you'll do just fine. Working with different versions is something programmers do commonly, and so it's not an uncommon thing that you're dealing with in this section of the course.